To understand the potentially transformative impact that Corona has had on the global world, I have with me today Dr. Adil Najam, who is the Dean of the Pardee School of Global Studies at Boston University and former Vice Chancellor of LUMS. Professor Adil, thank you so much for joining me today.
Certainly.
I'd like to start off by asking you that usually in times of crisis, we see that countries rally together, the population all comes together to support the country. We do not see we don't see an interplay of politics between domestic politicians inside the country. Under COVID, we're not seeing that happening. We're seeing that if you look at the US or you look at Pakistan, there is a disjoint between the state administrations and the opposition. Why is that?
I think it's partly the nature of the crisis and partly the nature of the countries. I think the point you raised is actually a brilliant one in the following sense. Across the world, when we think of, where has the response been good or where has the response been lacking, we find all sorts of different variables. But the really most important variable is that wherever the politics before COVID was coherent. Okay. Coherent doesn't mean everyone was on the same path, but it was reasonable, it was rational, it was normal. Right. There the response has been better. Wherever the politics, internal politics beforehand was in turmoil, you see the chaos continuing. For example, the US, where Donald Trump, the country was already so divided that you start seeing the same thing happening in the COVID response. You see the same, for example, in Britain. So I think the lesson here is that, this notion of a stable politics, again, stable doesn't mean everyone is on the same page. Right. But there is a certain reliability to political processes, and there is a focus in the political process to keep things moving rather than to tear them apart. Wherever that has happened, New Zealand, Germany, there you see something good, and that's the lesson that good government matters.
So another lesson that people are drawing out of this is that authoritarianism is good. China has been applauded for its response, and increasingly people have said authoritarian governments have been able to manage the corona much better than any democratic country. And the US, because of course you've seen the 65,000, almost 70,000 deaths now in the US, has been pointed out as particularly susceptible to this.
Wrong lesson.
Okay.
Absolutely wrong lesson. Authoritarian is not good, and nor has it shown here. I think what we've shown here is that for whatever reason, a government is able to create policy and implement it well. That will be good. Now, authoritarianism happens to be one of the ways in which, if you are an authoritarian government, you can clamp things down.
Right.
But what we do not see every authoritarian government doing well, right? So let us not extrapolate China into other countries. There is no other China. But there is no other country with 70 years of this sort of politics. Look at New Zealand, not authoritarian,
right,
but very much able to do it. Look at Singapore, not authoritarian in that sense.
These two countries who you're giving as an example, they're very, very small countries. I mean, Singapore is a city-state. New Zealand, I don't know, maybe 10 million people, very small populations. By comparison, you look at China and it's 1.5 billion people, and you have the United States with 350 million people. China was able to lock down Wuhan within 2 days, whereas United States wasn't able to take that decision.
Yes, but I think Donald Trump wasn't able to.
Okay.
The point I'm making is that let us not conflate a system of government with what's happening. In fact, I would argue that the US problem, the Donald Trump problem, has been trying to be authoritarian in a democratic polity.
Okay.
Right? Because a lot of the resistance he gets back is when he wants to make the sort of blanket statement, I'm saying so, therefore you must do it. Right. Well, that may work in China. That may India. I'll give you another example. Authoritarian country, India. Right. Doesn't work. You see all those videos of people sort of clamoring that lockdown caused even more congregation. It wasn't, that doesn't mean lockdowns are bad. That doesn't mean authoritarianism is good. That means bad government
But
is bad.
India is a democracy. How can you give India as an example?
But you have an authoritarian, no, it's not,
We have a
under Modi, it's a
government.
democracy, it's an authoritarian government, right? So it's not a question of system, it's a question of, there has never been a more authoritarian leadership in India than Modi. Okay. And the way he did it was authoritarian. I'm just saying, I'm going to close this out. Again, we can take the wrong lessons from it. The wrong lesson, for example, would be, well, therefore lockdowns must be bad. No, that's not true. Good lockdowns are good, bad lockdowns are bad. Doesn't mean authoritarianism is good. In fact, one of the worries that many people have, and we know this from previous crises, is that crises actually encourage authoritarianism. And post-crisis, we are going to see this again. There are going to be elections in various places, and they are going to be the authoritarian leaders who are going to say, you need a strong man.
Okay, so
this trend will increase.
So I want to just take you further up there. Before this crisis happened, I remember around December, it seemed very clear, to me at least, that Donald Trump was looking for a victory and was about to get a victory this year. It seemed that way, at least. After this crisis, we're not so sure. But yet you're saying, on the other hand, that this crisis may actually get people thinking that we do need an authoritarian type figure. And you've suggested that maybe Trump is. So do you think Trump has a better likelihood of winning or not?
Yeah, if you allow me to make that 2 points. So a lot of people are very worried about the rise of authoritarianism after this. Right. I was speaking to Francis Fukuyama recently for a series I did, and he said that never in his life has he been in a world where the immediate future is as uncertain, not just long-term future, but in 9 months. Okay. And the biggest worry he has is the same I've had for many years now, which is we were already seeing a rise of strongmen. And this could encourage that, because these leaders will come and say, you need a strong leader. Right. You need someone who can clamp this down. So therefore, make a trade with me. Give me your rights. Give me your freedoms, and I will give you stability. Now we come to Donald Trump. Donald Trump is very, very interesting position. At this point, there is no logical bone in my body that says he could win if the election was today. Okay. He has made every mistake that you could. He has not shown heart. He has just put people's lives imperiled. However, the elections are in November. Right. And we have 2 things we know. One, his base doesn't care what he does, because they have this sort of, the Urdu word junoon, they have this passion that he can do no wrong. And the second thing is, imagine by November, let's say, despite all the bad things, hopefully US is coming back to a better place. Okay. In November, when people are going to vote, he is going to, given that he just makes up things, he's going to say, see, what I did was right. Okay. He's going to forget all those statements. So what I'm saying is, don't write this election off. Logically, he should not win, but logically, he should not have won last time either.
Right. So this the COVID-19 has been described as a moment for China in a way that 9/11 was for Muslims, in the sense that it will transform relationships with China across the world, particularly in the United States. Do you see that happening, especially in light of the elections that you're mentioning in the US?
Very, very good question. So when you said as it was for Muslims, I don't think COVID will be for China what 9/11 was for Muslims, because after 9/11 until now, the pressure on Muslims just increased. Yes. And in a way, it became difficult to be one. Yes. Right, in many ways internationally. I don't think that's what we're going to say, but you are right. I think it is going to be a defining moment. I would say it's a defining moment for China, bigger than 9/11 for Muslims, in the following sense. I think it's more like a moment that was for the US in 1914, in 1910, in 1920. It's the rise of a major power. That was happening even before this. Right. So what I think COVID has done is that it has accelerated this great power rivalry. Okay. What was a rivalry, sort of, again, using the Urdu term, niwe, it was a low-key rivalry. Okay. Everyone knew about it. No one talked about it. Everyone was being polite. No one is being polite right now. In the US, China is now seen as not just rival, right, but question of conflict. And China, you have also seen, has taken the gloves off. So this
Sorry,
is, I
I
think,
missed your
coming
last
out.
point there. Adil, just say that last point again. It's been seen as what in the US?
So it used to be seen as a rival, as someone who could threaten us. It's now seen as an actual conflict.
Okay.
It is now, the US now clearly sees that's the country to beat.
So
So
it's
what
a
I am saying is,
transformative moment in the relationship between the two countries.
it clearly is. The superpower rivalry, and elephants are going to fight. And when elephants fight, grass gets trampled.
Right.
And countries like Pakistan and others are
Right.
going to be now in the middle of this fight. So if you, the pre-COVID, BC, before COVID, right? And then AC, after COVID. The world before COVID was this simmering tension between China and the US.
Right.
And everyone knew about it, but we were polite. Post-COVID, the tension is going to come out, gloves are off, and you're going to see not just trade wars, but much more obvious conflict between the two. I hope it doesn't turn into armed conflict, but it's not out of the realm.
So for a country like Pakistan, what do we do? I mean, we already have seen tensions between the United States and Pakistan over CPEC and the close relationship that China has with Pakistan. How do we need to play this then? What are your thoughts on it?
We need to do what animals in the jungle do when the elephants fight.
Okay.
Get out of the way.
Okay.
Get out of the way. They're going to be people, they're going to be wrong. They're going to be people who are going to say, well, this is your time to be strategic. This is your time to use your geography. This is your time to take sides. I do not think this is the time. That time will come.
Okay.
But let the elephants first fight. Because of our history, the US is going to be interested in us because they see us as being in China's camp, or at least being close to China. China might want to see us as someone, we need to cash our cards, we've been with you. And this is the time to say, look guys, we've got our own problems. In a way, I think COVID gives us a shield. The shield that COVID gives us is to say, we have our own problems. Again, I say, go back to 1914, go back to 1932, go back to those world wars. If this is going to become bad, do you want to be the one who takes sides very, very early and possibly takes the wrong side? Right. Whatever it might be.
So my last question to you is more on the economic front. During this whole crisis, we've seen a rise in a belief that we should be bringing in-house a lot of things that we were producing outside. So for the last 40, 50 years, since the World Trade Organization in particular was set up, we've all been doing globalization and we've had global supply chains. Do you see that, do you see those breaking down? And do you think developing countries will benefit or will lose out if they break down?
The second question first. Unfortunately, the poor never benefit, and the same is true for developing countries. This is the lesson of history. The rich, the powerful, the always prosper. The weak don't. However, the weak have to be more smart because of that reason. So you are right. Supply chains are one of the biggest issues of focus that is today and will be in a post-COVID world. We've created a world of just in time, right? We will produce and send things just in time when you need to buy that. That model has been under a lot of stress. I do not think that does mean that supply chains will go away, but I do think that they will mean something different. That was already happening. So already we were seeing some of the US manufacturing coming back home for nationalistic reasons.
Right.
So between nationalism and between international trade, I think you're right, supply chains will change. Will it be necessarily good for developing countries? I'm not so sure, right? Because what you would have wanted, what I would have wanted is that we could get a share of that supply chain. Things being made in Vietnam could be made in Pakistan. That may be more difficult. The one other final way this might help or work is countries that were not as dependent on supply chains might end up doing better, including Pakistan, right? So we have always lamented that we weren't major exporters. We weren't in this. But what that means is we don't have factories that have been installed as much.
Okay.
As Vietnam, as China was, right? So we are still more agricultural. So that might give a certain buoyancy, if not buoyancy, a safety net to our own economy. The honest answer is we do not know, but we do know supply chains will change. I am not sure it is automatically good for us. I think this is again time for smart policy.
Okay, thank you so much, Adil, for your insights today into everything.